In 1776, the Scottish philosopher and economist Adam Smith wrote the following words: "The things which have greatest value in use have frequently little or no value in exchange. Nothing is more useful than water, but it will purchase scarcely anything." 241 years later, welcome to the diff. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Disruptive Innovation Festival, the world's largest online festival of ideas that asks the question, what if we could redesign everything? My name is Nick Jeffries, and I work for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So we're coming to the end of the second week of the diff, and what a vintage year it's been so far, covering topics as diverse as how to reboot civilization after an apocalypse, all the way through to how to think like a 21st century economist. There are so many fine sessions to come and many to catch up on as well, so please get stuck in and expand your mind. Today, we're going to have a conversation about something that affects all of us every day of our lives. Our planet is defined by it, our bodies are mostly made of it, and without it, our economy and even our lives would be most problematic. If you haven't guessed by now, today we're going to talk about water. More specifically, how can the circular economy help us make more effective use of our water resources? To help explore this topic, we've assembled a broad cross-section of guests. In our studio, Philippa Roberts, circular economy expert and founder of environmental consultancy, Lo and Behold. Welcome, Philippa.
Thank you.
Also in the studio, Ben Earle, environmental scientist and water efficiency manager for Southern Water, a large UK water and wastewater utility. Welcome,
Hi.
Ben. And joining us from Odense in Denmark via video link, Mads Leff, CEO of water and wastewater company VCS, a company that has recently been recognised for their work with the prestigious Utility of the Future Today award by the World Environmental Federation. Hello. And congratulations on the award, Mads.
Thank you very much.
So Mads, we'll come back to you soon and hear no doubt why you won this accolade. But first, let's set the context a bit. Philippa, I'm going to ask you to kick things off. I started just now with a quote from The Wealth of Nations, a cornerstone of classical economics, published in 1776. The author went on to say, "The real price of everything, what everything really costs the person who wants to acquire it, is the toil and trouble of acquiring it." So 200 years later, can you describe the toil and trouble of acquiring water in our time? And perhaps, and if we carry on as we are, what are the big challenges in the foreseeable future?
Okay, so, well, I suppose the interesting thing is that really there shouldn't be that much toil and trouble. Water is naturally circular. The only reason we have any of the problems that we do is because of human intervention. And I think you can broadly think about that in three different ways. So to start with, we take too much water out. We use it for human consumption, we use it in our industry, and we use it for agriculture, predominantly in agriculture. The second problem that we create is we pollute it. We pollute that naturally circular system that's already there. And some of this we do on purpose. We put our human waste back into it, we put industrial waste back into it, and in many parts of the world, we actually put our rubbish directly into our rivers. So there's a lot of people who don't actually get their waste collected, and for them, the river is a place where you would naturally throw things to move it away from where you're living. We also pollute a lot by accident. So as we increasingly urbanise, there's a lot of water that runs off our urban areas that is contaminated with tiny microparticles that we don't often think about, but it could be things like the rubber from our tyres as we brake our cars. You know, there's these tiny particles and it's getting into our water system. There's the runoff from agriculture, from pesticides and fertilisers, all the things that we're putting on our crops but end up running off into the water. And there are also increasingly chemicals in human waste. So, we know that the thing to do with sewage is to flush your toilet and get it down into a system where it will be treated. But with the medications and things that we take, we're putting things into the water system that we perhaps don't know how to treat. So increasing hormone levels from all the contraception that we're taking that's going down through the human waste. That's the second way. And I think the third way is the impact we have on the actual catchment. So water is this natural flow, but as we urbanise, as we put down more concrete, we increase the risk of flooding, we increase the speed that water runs off into our rivers, which increases this risk of flooding. But we also deforest, we damage the areas where the water lands on the ground, where nature would naturally clean it up. So we have these sort of three big areas of impact, and they are big areas. The positive thing is that they're all problems that we've caused, so they should all be problems that we can solve. We should be able to change our behaviour, change our systems. And for me, the exciting thing about the circular economy is it's a way of stepping back and taking that systems approach to water, because we're a clever species, we're really, really bright. We come up with these amazing technologies, but we tend to look at different bits in the system. How do we clean up this bit of water here? How do we abstract this bit of water here? And the circular economy as a framework allows us to step back and look at the whole system, which is something that we have to do, because if we don't, we know the data on this. The World Economic Forum says that water stress is the biggest threat to mankind, the global water crisis. Yeah. We know that if we carry on the way we're going, by 2030, demand will exceed supply by 40%. 40%. We can't go on.
There's climate change, so
and then
supplies are getting more unpredictable. Okay.
So we have to do something about this.
Okay, so you mentioned the circular economy just then. So anyone who's been following the work of the foundation will know that the circular economy is founded on three principles: designing out waste and externalities, keeping resources in loops, and regenerating natural capital. Can you perhaps map that onto the way we use water?
So, well, I suppose there's a number of different ways. If we step back, one of the first things is the fact that actually we're not very good at putting a value on water. It's the stuff that Adam Smith said. It's comparatively cheap in lots of places, and if we don't understand the value, we don't know how to make the system work better. And the value is also different for different players, even within the same catchment. So it will cost me as a householder a different amount to how much it would cost a farmer in the same area as how much it would cost an industrial user. So a circular approach helps us to start to understand the value of the whole thing. I think for me, one of the interesting bits, and my background's in waste and resource management, is actually the value that's there in the stuff that we accidentally or purposefully put in the water. So I think there's a lot of value in the wastes that are in there, and we have to start being, and we are starting to be much more clever about trying to capture that, and not just seeing these pollutants as problems we need to get rid of, but actually resources that we can mine and get value from. So for me, that's a really, really interesting area.
Okay, so we need to sort of price it better, and we need to sort of appreciate all the nutrients and value that is in our water systems.
Yeah.
Okay. Ben, your company, Southern Water, manages the wastewater of over 4 million customers, I believe,
That's right.
and provides clean water for over 2 million customers, including this very mug of water I'm drinking here, which is very good, very tasty. So to what extent is the water sector already embracing these circular economy principles? And it would be good if you could give me a few examples from your experiences or from your company.
Okay, well, Philip has summed it up really, really neatly, and I think there's a lot of lack of imagination in the water industry. It is overcomplicated. So there are examples, good examples, of where we are. We're spreading the sewage cake on the land, following the end tailpipe of a wastewater treatment plant process, if you like. So we are putting sludge back on the land. We're actually capturing energy, and in many examples where we're actually running our own plants on the energy that we're capturing, particularly through biogas, which is really, really important. But there is such a long way to go, because the majority of the water industry is not set up in a circular way, although as Philippa rightly said, it is the perfect circular product, if you like. It's not being seen as such, and part of my role really is to sort of inspire people to think differently about water, and water reuse is something that we as a company are looking at in a major way, because most wastewater treatment plants are taking polluted water, putting it through very high quality treatment, and then pumping that high quality water out to sea And in our case, in this part of the world, we are an area of water stress. So, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you use some of that water that's perhaps treated to different levels of cleanliness and then recycle that back to different sectors to use more creatively, if you like.
So you say the industry is not set up in the right way, and they're doing these crazy things like pumping perfectly good water into the sea. So why are they doing this, and how can we change this?
Well, I guess some of the things that are changing are the way we're sort of perceiving things. So sludge was the thing that all people talked about in the water industry. It's now been renamed bioresources. So that gives you an indication of how the terminology is showing how in the UK water regulators are saying, this is a resource, you should be utilising that resource. It's got a market value, it's got a value to society, so make better use of it. And I think that's really, really positive. And in the same way, we're actually, using delivery incentives, if you like, to actually prod private companies to be going in the right way, using the market to drive the right behaviour. And on water efficiency, which is the area that I particularly look after, it's about how do we change the nature of how developers are building new plots where you're putting in these resources, you're not just connecting it randomly into our grid. Because, why would you set up a system where we're using high quality drinking water to flush toilets? You wouldn't start from here, would you? But we are where we are. That's how our industry is developed.
Yeah, it's a lumbering linear system.
It is.
And it's going to take a lot to change that, yeah. So you mentioned this returning digestates and sludge cake to farmers' fields. That's at the heart of the circular economy, closing this nutrient cycle back to the fields. Is that being done a lot? How widespread is that? And both of you can often answer this. And what are the obstacles for more to be done?
Sludge has always been widely used, but as Philip has said, that other things are ending up in in the sewage treatment process, which makes some of it quite tricky, because you can't just return any sludge to any field for any crop. You have to look very much at the market for that and what's acceptable because of what's in some of
the micropollutants issue?
Well, absolutely.
Which, I think in your intro you were sort of talking about these the chemicals and the pharmaceuticals and these very complicated small things that are in that in our urban wastewater streams.
Yes, and like I say, we're very clever. So as we get better at detecting these things, we also get better at creating new things that can be problems. And the nice thing about a more systems approach is trying to figure out the best part of the system to take these pollutants out, so that you don't then have detrimental effects further down the line. So sludge commonly goes back on farmland. Those nutrients are commonly going back in. But we don't do things because of the way our regulations are set up, like process food waste in the same plants that process our sewage sludge, which would make total sense. We have the infrastructure already there. It'd be an effective and an efficient way of doing things, but we don't because of the way our regulations are set up. And in some ways, in a country like the UK and probably across all of Europe, we're in a situation where we put these systems in place a long time ago now. And because we were the first ones to do it, we are now trying to figure out how to bend that linear system to make it more circular, because it made sense when water was abundant and the planet could soak up those pollutants. And it'll be interesting to see what different systems are put in place in other parts of the world, because obviously, there are over 1 million people who don't have access to a toilet at all. At some point, infrastructure has to be put into these other parts of the world, and you can guarantee they're not going to be doing it in the way that we are. As Ben said, you don't spend all that energy and all that technology treating water to make it drinkable to then flush your toilet with it or wash your car with it. It's totally nuts when you think about it like that. So
I think we'll definitely come back to that later in the discussion. But I think this is a good time to bring Mads in. You actually mentioned energy recovery as one of the things that Southern Water is doing. So Mads, is Mads there? Yeah.
I'm here.
Hey Mads, good to have you back. So in 2011, your predecessor, a gentleman called Anders Beckard, he set your company an ambitious goal to be carbon and energy neutral in 3 years.
That's right.
That's a pretty ambitious target.
That's a very ambitious
So
target.
maybe you can pick up the story from here and tell us what happened next.
Okay. Let me just... Can you put on the slides?
yeah.
They're on, yeah? They're on, Mad?
They're on?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Here we go. Here we go. Yeah. So that's right. We set out a very, very ambitious target of becoming energy and CO2 neutral in only 3-4 years. And it turned out to be very, very beneficial for our entire organization, setting a very bold goal, because suddenly energy became a major issue in our entire company. And that really shifted the minds of everybody in the company, including me. Back then I was the manager for wastewater treatment. So we for many years we focused on cleaning wastewater, doing it to almost drinking water quality, and then discharging the water into the river. But we didn't really care about the energy consumption. So trying to think of things in a more holistic manner, we actually managed to become energy net producing at the wastewater treatment plants in only a couple of years. So I put together a few slides just to give you an impression on the development of our company. But first, let me just give you a brief introduction to the company. We are in the third largest city of Denmark, in Odense, in the middle of the island to the south here. Zooming in a little bit, we are the utility for water and wastewater in this municipality. We serve a population of roughly 200,000 people. Our company was established as the first public waterwork back in 1853, and we still have our headquarters in the old waterwork in Odense. Today we operate 7 water treatment plants and 8 wastewater treatment plants. The third largest city of Denmark, as I mentioned, Odense, is really famous for one thing. It's the birthplace of Hans Christian Andersen. So that's why I put this nice fairy tale picture in the slide. Our utility is a publicly owned utility. We supply drinking water and we treat wastewater. This is a photo of our largest wastewater treatment plant, and this is where we have the energy production. Without going into technical details, in the middle of the picture you can see 4 circular tanks. That's the biogas plant in the middle of the treatment plant. And as was mentioned in the beginning, this is the key to becoming energy neutral. So taking out all the sludge, all the fats, oil and greases, and the carbon sources from the wastewater, converting it to biogas, and then converting the biogas to electricity. That's it is really quite a simple procedure, but for us it required a complete change in mentality to start focusing on energy neutrality. I'm going to show a slightly complicated slide here, but what is interesting is the energy balance on the right-hand scale. And as you can see, back in 2014, we actually became energy neutral. But only 5 years before that, we only had an energy production accounting for 50% of our net energy consumption. So within only 5 years, 4 years really, we completely changed the energy production, the operation of the wastewater treatment plant, and the mentality of our operators and specialists. So as you can see, this year we are approaching 120% of energy production.
Mads, that's very impressive that you managed to fulfill that target within 3 years. So the paper that you sent me that described your work, it split up the challenges into, or the lessons learned in technical and organisational. So
Yes.
was there a big capital investment required to make the change
There was only a few capital investments required here. Really, it was upgrading of existing infrastructure, like putting in a new gas engine for electricity production, with a much better yield than the old machinery.
So most of the challenges are more organisational, would you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I was intrigued by lesson 7 in your paper, which is called "Have No Fear," and it describes operational staff who constantly challenge themselves to do better.
Exactly.
How do you motivate staff to adopt this mindset? Does chocolate work, or do you have to try something else?
No, chocolate works fine. We prefer cake, but anyway, it's the constant challenge of also empowering your personnel, actually allowing them to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. So we have empowered our technicians to be able to make the right decisions. It was not me as a manager, as a leader that took those decisions. It was the specialists that actually knew what was going on, and we empowered them to make those changes. So that made a very, very big difference in the mindset.
So it's it's senior management setting ambitious targets, but then empowering the staff to sort of just try stuff. But of course, trying stuff with a wastewater treatment plant that serves 200,000 people, that can be a little bit risky, yeah?
That can be a little bit risky, but that is really the bold statement here is that as long as you know what you're doing, of course, then go ahead and just implement the changes, see what happens, and as long as you don't compromise your effluent quality, then it's okay.
All right. So we did a project in India last year, and one of the forecasts was there's going to be 450 million new Indian city dwellers by 2050. And they're going to have to build 100 new cities, probably 500 new treatment plants, or maybe more. Yeah. So how can Indian city planners, Indian civil engineers, how can they create energy positive treatment plants? Because by the way, one of our other findings was currently 70% of treatment plants in Indian cities do not work because of unreliable and costly power supplies. So how can we create energy positive treatment plants in India?
Well, I'll answer your question just in a minute, because I have another interesting point on the energy, because this is just electricity. In our municipality, heat has a very high value also. We have a district heating system, so we use excess heat from our power production at a big power plant to heat all the buildings in the town. And the wastewater treatment plant is connected to this district heating system also. So looking at the heat balance, we are supplying a lot of heat to the district heating system also. So combining electricity and heat into one makes a huge difference. So getting back to your question on how to become energy neutral, this is a map of the area that we are in. On the right-hand side, you see the different small municipalities, and the blue dots on the left indicates the placement, but also the size of the wastewater treatment plants. So to operate a wastewater treatment plant in an energy neutral manner, there's really the question of the bigger the better. So here size really does matter. So if we should change the infrastructure on our island, my statement is that we could easily become energy producing on wastewater if we were to change the infrastructure. And that's the same, that goes everywhere. The bigger the better, more centralized operation, that will definitely yield the opportunity of becoming energy neutral.
Very interesting.
I mean, this is such a contrast to the UK, where obviously networks of heat and how you use it with your neighbours is absolutely fundamental, but we're decades behind that at the moment, I would say.
Well, I was interested by the whole centralised versus decentralised, and I'm sure, but maybe we've got some questions coming in now from the audience, but before we really dive into the questions, can I hand over to my co-host Joe, who will tell you what else is going on in the DIF world. Over to you, Joe.
Hello, thank you, Nick. Yes, for those of you looking to explore more about how the circular economy can influence and create a more equitable economy, look no further than the captivating session with Kate Rayworth, author of How to Become a 21st Century Economist. She talks passionately about how circular economy informed her thinking when she was trying to design a new economic model for the 21st century. She calls it donut economics. And that was a live session earlier this week, and you can catch up with that on Diff On Demand on diff.co. From comparing economics to donuts to comparing economics to biology and insights from living systems. Directly after this session, we have 3 speakers from the Mahindra United World Colleges in India, exploring innovation in education and trying to convince us that economics and the teaching of economics and biology are essentially the same thing, so quite intriguing there. It's nearly the weekend, and sadly we don't have any live sessions over the weekend, but we will be kicking off at 9:30 GMT on Monday morning with a session looking at the future of materials within a circular economy and a virtual tour around the materials lab at the Copenhagen School of Design and Technology, one not to miss. Not to be too sad though, heaps to catch up on over the weekend on Diff On Demand. As I say, thinkdiff.co, and also don't forget to keep up to date with all of the news and gossip on the Twitter channel #thinkdiff. So let me hand you back to Nick in the studio and what is turning out to be a really interesting discussion around something that we all take for granted: water.
Thank you very much, Joe. Now, I just used a banned word in the diff world then, which is interesting because the whole centralized thing, I mean, we have a C100 member called Biopolis who's just joined us recently, and they've actually devised a new system for treating water at sort of the 10,000, 20,000 population level. Mads, you were talking about we need to go bigger. I've definitely had some conversations with you, Philippa, about having smaller systems.
Yeah.
So perhaps I'll ask you, Philippa, what do you think about decentralised versus centralised? Is it a diversity thing, or is
I think it's got to be a bit horses for courses, and there is an argument about the efficiency that you get in big centralised systems, but we work in parts of the UK, and it's going to be worse in many other countries where there are lots of small rural communities that are served by small works, and we're trying to figure out the best way to do that. Small wastewater treatment works, and there is this value that's going through the system, and we have a tendency as we've moved in the UK to a centralised model to just tanker huge quantities of sludge to the centralised processing units, which seems nuts when you look at the system as a whole. Why would you drive around water and wastewater in a big tanker? So there has to be better solutions, and it's trying to figure out how to make the economics of it work.
Word we use a lot.
It's a word I struggle with. I'm a recovering economist, so my training was completely flawed. But I think it's a really interesting model. So one of the things we've talked about before, I look at a lot at all resources, physical as well as wastewater resources. And when we properly understand the value of the stuff that's in there, I think it can create fantastic opportunities for local small-scale economic development and growth. And like I say, there's so many bright people out there. If we can let them know the resources that are available, and this is something we've talked about with Southern Water, can we empower communities to try and find the value in their own resources, even at a small scale? Because actually maybe we need to think differently, and we need to not just be looking to within the industry for the solutions, but putting it out there and saying, hey communities, here's a little wastewater treatment works. We're tankering your sewage away. Who can think of something better to do with it? If we clean it up a bit, what would you do with this grey water if it was available to you? What would you do with some of these nutrients? So I don't think it's horses for courses, and I have a bit of a reaction to the kind of centralised model, because I think we lose some of the innovation at the fringes if we're not careful.
I think Itvan Cañeras, the guy who founded Biopolis, his argument was that within a city you might have residential, he called them urban cells. He thinks a little bit like a biologist. So in this area there's the kind of wastewater you get from residential. In this area of town you've got a juice factory. In this area of town you've got, and so but combining all that into one central treatment plant, and then perhaps your treatment is going to be more complicated.
Yes.
Whereas rather than keeping them separate.
Yeah.
I've got a question from Lucy. She asks, what role does embedded water play in the circular economy? Most of our stuff uses a lot of water in the production process. Who wants to answer that one?
Well, I suppose
for it, Ben.
potatoes is a good example of crisps, if you like, because potatoes use a lot of water in the process. And I know there's been a lot of efficiency driven out of that by actually looking at the process of producing crisps, for example, in a different way. But yeah, everything from a cup of coffee to your pair of jeans.
Clothing and
absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, the big challenge for the UK is a lot of this is imported water. It's not in our system. And I think, to be honest, it's something that the water companies really need to move much harder on and faster on, because embedded water has not been a big part of what most water companies have done, and it is a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I was always taught, and actually this was reaffirmed by a book I read recently called The Big Thirst, by a guy called Charles Fishman. And his conclusion from his book was that water problems are local. In no way do the actual water problems of one continent directly affect the behaviour of people in another. But I think do you agree with this? I mean, I think as we get more globalised, water problems may be transcending borders. I hear the amount of water that comes out of India each year, just in bales of untreated cotton, is equivalent to 80% of their domestic demand.
Yeah, which
So
is just nuts.
maybe water
isn't it?
problems aren't as local as we think they are.
Well, we live in a globalised economy now, don't we? And especially if you think of things like food, Ben talked about potatoes, but if agriculture is 70% of global water demand, then there's a lot of embedded water in our food products, and a lot of them aren't coming locally. And it's something, this comes back to the point I said about value. If the value isn't properly put on water for its different uses, and if the value is different for different users, then you will get these imbalances in the system. So if it's pretty much free for farmers to abstract water, to keep their land irrigated, then why wouldn't they be doing that as much as possible? And when you don't think in a system, you don't realise the impacts of that in different parts of the world, in different parts of the system.
Yeah.
It is something I definitely think we do need to talk about more.
Absolutely.
Indeed.
And we do have a responsibility in a country where we import so much stuff when we're not manufacturing and growing stuff in the same way that we were. Same with carbon, we can't export the problem.
No, but water footprinting is even more complicated than carbon footprinting, if you like, because a molecule of carbon is a pretty similar impact all around the globe. But water can, you can have some areas where you're using large amounts of water, but actually you've got masses of abundance of it. But equally, you could have something that's very efficient, but it's in a really tight sort of supply-demand balance, and so the impact is higher.
I think we've got one from Mads here, actually. It's from Marco, one of the guys at the Foundation. I'm glad to hear a few Foundation people listening to this session. Really impressed with the energy-neutral wastewater treatment plants. But is that the best way of using nutrients in wastewater? Maybe you can answer that, and also tell us a few other things that you can do with this stuff in wastewater.
Right now, energy production is, in my opinion, the best use for the carbon source in the wastewater, at least. But there's plenty of other nutrients in wastewater, and we're just starting to explore extracting. The big issue right now is recycling of phosphorus, and there are emerging technologies for recycling nitrates, or even making ammonia out of wastewater. That is a very, very energy the energy consumption for producing ammonia is very high, and then that can easily be extracted from wastewater. So recycling nitrogen is another option. So, but we are only just starting to see these technologies emerge, and for now, as was mentioned, we recycle nitrogen and phosphorus by applying the biosolids to the farmland. But I'm convinced that in a few years we will see technologies that we can extract phosphorus from wastewater and biosolids and recycle it to where it is actually needed. Because applying biosolids to farmland is a way of recycling, but it's not necessarily the best way of recycling the nutrients. You need to recycle the phosphorus where it's needed.
Okay, So all of those, because I mean, if you just read around a little bit of this and attend these conferences, you hear about the bioplastics and the platform chemicals and cellulosic materials. Is this all just at the lab stage at the moment? Is it going to be a few years?
At the lab stage, to my knowledge, it's not commercially available, and but then there's a lot of focus on these issues right now. So there's a very, very big development in these areas, in the utilities, in the universities, with the suppliers, with the consultants. So there's a huge movement on recycling all nutrients really from wastewater.
Thank you. We have another question coming in. I think this is for you, Philippa. Can you apply circular economy thinking to catchment area management?
Yes.
So looking at the catchment scale, how would circular economy look there?
Yes, totally, and it's one of the areas I think probably say is quite successful here in the UK. It's something that we do much better now because it involves working with a number of different stakeholders. So it involves working with all the farmers and the landowners and the people who populate those catchment areas to help them understand better practices. So from really simple things like fencing off rivers so cattle can't graze so close to rivers, to water companies actually helping fund and demonstrate technologies that may make fertiliser use better, so there's less runoff. There's an awful lot of work that's been done there, and I think it's incredibly successful and it is working well. There's quite a lot of good examples of that working from the New York catchment through to Bogota to the ones across the UK. So it's the bit where I think the water industry really gets circular at the moment. So we kind of get it upstream in the catchment area. We're starting to understand the value in the nutrients at the bottom. We're not quite yet totally joined up in terms of all of it as a whole system and the impacts of all of it as a whole system. But we're talking about it, and that's the main thing.
And of course, the shift has taken place in how water companies are in their communities. I mean, before you used to have the sort of wastewater plant. It was kind of, we don't really know what goes on in there. It's kind of like all that thing in the corner of the town sort of thing. But now we're moving to a situation where water companies are actively working across the catchments with a whole multitude of partnerships. I mean, my whole role is about developing partnerships to change people's perceptions, behaviour, and actually make things occur. And catchment management is a great example. Getting groups of farmers together to work differently and sharing abstraction licenses and this whole approach is where we've got to go as we get to grips with how we actually work with these resources more holistically.
Yeah. Well, I think you've already answered this question, but I'm just going to sort of say it anyway because it captures what you're saying quite nicely. Should we be looking at this, the water issue on its own? Food waste is 25% of freshwater consumption. Lots of water also used for energy production. Admittedly, this is withdrawn rather than consumed. The water, energy, food nexus. Are you guys talking to the food and energy guys? I think this is aimed at you, Ben, and you, Mads. I mean, do you've heard of course, the energy, food, water nexus. So do you have meetings with electricity companies or food producers, as part of this connected, holistic thinking?
This is all just starting up, but as I mentioned, we have right now connected the wastewater treatment plant to the district heating system in town. And we are exploring industries, discussing with food companies or other industries that may have waste products that has a higher value. So it shouldn't be mixed with household waste or normal wastewater, but could be used directly for energy production or nutrient recovery. So traditional combined system, that means we have the waste from households and industries all mixed. We are trying to see if we can utilize industry waste in a more intelligent way than just mixing it into a grey water system.
I mean, picking up on the decentralised point earlier on, I think in this area of Hampshire, we did a study looking at the energy spend on Hampshire, and 98% of what people spend on energy is leaving the region at the moment. So there is a real chance, and with the water company at the heart of it, to set up a kind of decentralised energy strategy where we have more homegrown energy sources linked to our local needs as a company. I mean, energy is our biggest expenditure. So there's, not in sense, the electricity market is being disrupted with more local providers coming in, and that's a good thing, and that will help us to get closer to our communities, a bit like what's going on in Denmark. It's very much sort of how can we get the average consumer to understand the value of what they've got and link it in with their local energy generation, which is helpful to us.
I agree with most of that, but energy isn't my biggest expenditure. Food is.
Okay.
Right. This is a sort of big question. So, you did mention, I think, in your intro or maybe afterwards, about the big problems, like sort of we're talking about how we can recover energy from wastewater, that kind of stuff. But in the whole big wide world, there's 1 billion people who don't have access to fresh water. There's, I think, 1.5 billion people who don't have access to proper sanitation. How can, let's put these as the SDG challenges. Can circular economy be applied to these bigger mega challenges in the water world?
Most definitely, and like we said before, we are trying to bend that linear system because we have infrastructure that was put in place over 100 years ago, and it's incredible actually how well they put it in place. The fact that the Victorians built our systems, and we're still just tweaking around the edges with a lot of them, but it makes it very hard for us to adapt to these changing situations and to all these stresses on the system. So yeah, there's 1 million people with no toilet, over 2 billion people who, even if they have access to sewage systems, they don't work properly, like in India, where the power isn't there to run the systems. You've got over 3 billion people who have no access to any waste collection infrastructure. For all these people, there's this opportunity to leapfrog us and put in place what could be truly circular systems. And whether they're big centralised ones in the big urban areas or more decentralised depending on the communities and what resources are being generated there in the communities, it doesn't really matter. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but I think it's an incredible opportunity.
To embed it in the DNA right at the design stage.
I mean, instead of trying to fix the problems that we've created, they can understand the issues of a system that that tries to grow and adapt and build things that are flexible. Yeah. The systems that we've built here are systems that have been built to last 25, 40, 60 years. And then we wonder why, we're struggling to make them work 20 years down the line. You just can't predict what's going to happen in the future. So to build basic infrastructure that is more flexible, that's more modular, that you can take apart and dismantle and adapt, I think is the way forward for a lot of our basic infrastructure.
And it's designed to get the nutrients back.
Designed to get the nutrients back, and to think of this nexus that we're talking about, like Ben said, the community element is really important, and there's some really nice examples of community-owned energy schemes partnering with their water companies, because water companies have lots of physical space. Absolutely. They have physical sites that local communities can use to put solar PV or whatever they want on, and they own it. They own that resource. They're getting the benefit from it. It's the same with the nutrients that are available. There's lots of, if you were starting from scratch, you wouldn't design the system like it is now. No. So let's take the really awful lack of infrastructure in so many parts of the world and use it as this incredible opportunity to put something in place that's so much better and that will be able to cope with the huge populations explosions and the huge urbanisation that we're going to see that will happen over the next decades.
Okay, let's finish with a thought experiment. Yeah. Ooh. So we've got a worldwide water czar. Yeah, and you three have been appointed to his water advisory board.
Excellent.
Brilliant.
What one piece of advice would you give the worldwide water czar? Who wants to start?
Oh, okay, great.
Should we go from the left to the right?
Yeah.
Right.
Go on then, Ben. I'll put you on the hot seat first.
I think we need to join up the way we've got a lot of development coming. We know that, and it's coming in the system. So we need to be really imaginative about that new development. We need to plug in water efficiency, making the water usage in those developments really efficient, and making the linkages to the local community really clear. And I think if we could do that and really show the future, symbolise the future as being different to how we've done it in the past, that's the first thing I would say.
Better linkages to local communities. Yeah. Philippa, how about you?
I think I would say let's really think about what we're using water for. because here in Europe, you know, we treat water to this incredibly high standard for pretty much every use, and it's a valuable, limited resource, and it takes a lot of resources to get it that clean. So let's be really thoughtful about what we need our water for, and not just have one product that's supposed to do everything. Let's have different grades of water. Let's think about it.
Multiple water products, just thinking about our usage.
Yeah, and then our dirty water can be used. You know, somebody out there will want dirty water.
Yeah,
so
my garden.
Exactly.
Mads, how about you?
The idea of the flexibility in a system when trying to build new systems, flexibility is a key issue. And then learning. I mean, we have had water and wastewater installations for 150 years in the Western Europe. All our experience, we should build networks so people don't make the same mistakes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If centralized units is a bad idea, then they shouldn't be repeated in India or in Indonesia. So we should learn from each other. So we should really build networks and share our knowledge and find the best solution for being a rural area or mega cities in China.
Great. Flexibility and learning from our mistakes.
Yes.
Well, that was an excellent conversation. We can continue this conversation if you want. On the session page, there is a comments area at the bottom. I'm going to encourage our guests to actually engage with that over the next couple of days.
Yeah, sure.
And so if you have any more questions, please put them in those comments. So if you enjoyed this session, I think you might enjoy previous sessions on regenerative agriculture, biomimicry, microalgae, and yesterday was even a session on the sanitation economy by the Toilet Board Coalition. Great name, that. Next Wednesday, I'll be tuning into one about Watter, WATT-R, who are a startup who have developed a flat pack system for delivering basic water and energy services. So plenty of great stuff to stimulate your grey matter. I think my one takeaway from the session is that if the circular economy can allow us to fully appreciate the value of water, then that will be a great thing. Value is something that we keep coming back to again and again and again. That's all from us here. Thanks once again to my guests and to the audience. See you again soon. Goodbye.